My name is Gart Davis. I'm one of the co-founders from Spoonflower, and I'm going to talk today about creating an open API so that any business can print fabric. So I'll cover it in 5 points. First, just a little bit to introduce who we are. Then talk about why we want to open up our business, what our goals are, talk about how the API works, and then give a couple of examples of applications that we've built that are built on top of the application programming interface. And then just wrap up by talking about what we're hoping for down the road. That's working. Okay. Just a quick Spoonflower overview. Spoonflower was founded in 2008. It's an on-demand fabric website. So it's a website that makes fabric. We do ultra-short runs. So on an average day, we'll do 2,000 different fabric items, and we'll do them about 1 meter on average in size. We're headquartered in Durham, North Carolina. And we've got about 125 employees. And in general, our mission is to empower makers with digital textile technology. So to follow me through the rest of this presentation, I'm going to ask for you to make a few assumptions. The first one is that textiles as a medium are on a path to inevitably becoming mostly digital. The second one is that transformation will create some of the same kinds of opportunities that we saw as other media became digital. So for example, video and books and music. So when you think about that, you think about the transition from 3 networks to 1 million producers on YouTube, and you start to get the idea of what I'm talking about. So the question is, how do we as a textile community maximize this opportunity? There are a lot of barriers to making things with digital fabric. And so what we wanted to look at was, what could we do to take some of those barriers down? So this is actually a screenshot from Google Street View, and for people who want to actually go inside our factory, if you find Spoonflower and go to the About page, you can go straight in and have a look around. So right now, Etsy sellers and other very small businesses make up about 40% of the people who buy digitally printed fabric from Spoonflower. And what they're experiencing is that in the value chain of creating a finished good, printed fabric is often the very first step. And if you can make that first step completely unique, then every other step down that value chain has that property. And that's been great. Lots of folks on Etsy have taken advantage of that to create products that match a particular market need. But to be on Etsy, you have to make things by hand. And you operate Spoonflower by 1 click at a time. What we wanted to do was create the same kind of possibility for digital entrepreneurs, for technologists that web entrepreneurs that work with digital tools to produce fabric. So I'll give you a bit of an analogy with Amazon Web Services. To become a great e-commerce business, a global e-commerce business, Amazon had to build a global e-commerce infrastructure, and in 2008 they decided, wow, we've got this great thing, we can rent that layer out to all sorts of other businesses. And as a matter of fact, Spoonflower itself runs entirely on Amazon's network. And as a result, we don't have to research and buy and pay for a global e-commerce network. We just use theirs. That process that they've provided for is difficult, it's expensive, the research and development on it is moving constantly, and they're investing immensely to stay at the front end of that. If I draw that analogy over to digital textiles, Spoonflower had to invest a lot to become good at printing, and we've come up with a marketplace and a particular approach to selling digital fabric, but there are lots of other approaches, and there are lots of other possibilities of things you can do with fabric when you can buy it 1 yard at a time. And so now we have to continue to invest, and we have to stay on top just to manage our own business, but we want to open up this layer, essentially open up the factory so that other businesses that we might never even think of could take advantage of it. So I've already said that printing on fabric is hard and expensive, and that that Spoonflower is going to have to continue to make heavy investments in this. But there are a lot of opportunities that we'll never think of, and we'd like to make those possibilities happen and make digital fabric available to other businesses as well. I'll give you a bad example of this. If I am an entrepreneur and I'm a coder and I know a bunch of Etsy sewists, and I decide that I want to start a company that makes board shorts and imports files from your Instagram feed and allows you to form them into a collage, and bam, you can make board shorts out of that. And I would send that off to the Spoonflower API, get a bunch of board short fabric, send them off to my Etsy sewist friends, and they would ship them back off to that customer. So that's not a very good example, but I think the world might need some more personal board shorts. I don't know. We'll see. So how could this work? So just to kind of follow through the board shorts example, these are the primary objects that are at the heart of Spoonflower. You have a user account. So if you've already got a user account, you would log into the API using your own authentication. In the example of the board shorts, you would upload that design file containing the images as arranged on your website. You could query what fabrics were available and make those fabrics available as choices to the person buying the shorts. You could then assemble the combination of a design and a fabric with a repeat style. Maybe it's half drop, maybe it's mirror, maybe it's a standard repeat style, and a DPI. Maybe the photos need to be this big, maybe they need to be this big, into a digital fabric item, and then convey that into an order and make it an order item, and then add an address and a shipping method and checkout, all as part of the API. So an important enabler in all of this is that people who are buying a pair of board shorts need to be able to see a preview of what they're going to get, and it needs to be really good. That, the preview is the thing where e-commerce is concerned. You can't just go and hold it. So how do we create digital fabric that an API customer could use? I'm going to go ahead and illustrate that. So the next thing I'm going to show you, which is includes some video, which may or may not play beautifully, we'll see, is the API harness that is the documentation of the API. And inside that harness, you can actually run each query of the API, and then you can see the code that runs it. So it's kind of self-explanatory. It's a REST API, and let's go ahead and take a look at it. So the first thing that shows up this is the harness, and we're going to go down and put in some arguments. The first thing is a design ID, and then this is digital fabric, so I've got my X and Y in inches, and I have to export that out into an X and Y of an image size in pixels. Okay, it's not a very beautiful design, but I think you get the idea. And let's say I wanted something that was bigger than maybe that was a thumbnail. So now let's put in 400 by 400 and try it again. And now I get a larger digital fabric. Both of those, they're two different X, Y in the view pane, but they're the same representation of 12 inches by 12 inches. So if you can understand, your board short preview may be this big or it may be this big, and you're going to want to have fabric that matches that dimension so that it looks accurate, so that it's accurate. So that's kind of the nerdy stuff in terms of how you can interact with the API. How would you actually use this? So the next thing I'm going to show you is an example. This is a proof of concept that was actually done by a team of coding apprentices. So these are people who started a 12-week program not knowing how to code. Okay, some of them knew some things how to code, but and then they learned for 9 weeks, and then they built for 3 weeks, and this is what they built. So we actually have a couple of our employees, Katie Allen and Kristen Hayden, that were part of this team of apprentices, and they have two fixations. One is quilting. So it was built around quilting, and the other one you'll notice is goats. So we'll have goats as a theme here. So the first step that we're going to see is choosing a quilting project. The second is to choose a block pattern, and the third is to then assemble designs and put them into the block pattern in your quilt. So I'll go ahead and play the next step here. So we're going to jump into this program. It's called Flower Patch. Choose a lap quilt project. Select a 9-block pattern, and then we're going to go and search for a palette of designs, and of course this is where the goats come in. We're going to search for goats, and we get back some nice looking goats, and we're going to choose the happy goats, some godlike goat, and some red goats. And now we're going to apply them to the design. The godlike goat gets the middle piece, so and then the corners are the happy goats, and the edges are the red goats, and bam, we've got a quilt block. So we'll move ahead to preview the whole block and save it off. Goat God, okay, and that's now we have a quilt. And just so you get a sense for why it's so important to have appropriate dimensions in your preview, if you're now going to go print that, this is how much fabric you need to make exactly what you saw in the preview. So going from pixels that you're watching on the screen to pixels that are going to be printed to the dot, so that the goat god is trimmed exactly like he needs to be trimmed in the quilt, is super, super important. So that's kind of a key thing in creating a preview. So that's a simple example, and again, that was a proof of concept. I don't have a goat quilt to hold up now, but I'm going to move on to another example that is a little more sophisticated. So if you want to take fabric and actually wrap it onto a 3D model, you still start with flat fabric, but there are lots of great web-based tools for showing somebody what that flat fabric will look like wrapped around a human. So we're going to show something. Anybody who's interested in this, there's a 20-minute video on it that was from FESPA Milan that's all about just this project. But so this is a project that integrates cut and sew patterns as kind of a mashup with 3D on the web and a mashup with digital print. So if I have a pattern, a cut and sew pattern, and I have a surface design, and I composite them, and I print it, I get something that somebody they don't have to pin, they don't have to, they can go straight to cutting and sewing. And hopefully this gets more people into sewing and gives you, at the same time, a really great consumer experience so you can actually see the thing you're gonna make. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. So this is a project that's a little further along. It's in closed beta at the moment. There are two things you can do. You can make a shirt or you can make a tote bag. So I'm not looking for goats here. I'm gonna look for bicycles because I like bicycles. And I'm gonna choose from designs that are actually mine. So I've got two filters in here and I like that one. That's gonna be the design and now I'm gonna show a 3D preview. This preview is actually using exactly the same code that gave you a flat fabric, but wrapped in a 3D model. It's using a pair of tools called 3.js, which automates a library called WebGL. I'm gonna choose options. Maybe I want long sleeves or short or a V-neck. And now I'm gonna look at the fabric that I'm actually gonna get in the mail. Now I need to decide how big it's gonna be, small, medium, large, which kind of fabric I want to buy it on, and then I can go and add to cart, and this time I actually do have a preview, like not a preview, and there's a shirt. So that's a second project that again is working via the API to print fabric digitally around an immersive customer experience. So I'm going to take just a few minutes to talk about why anybody would want to do this. So there are really just a couple of points. The first one is that when you go shopping now, it's to some degree it's an act of creativity, but people want just the right amount of creativity, right? I don't want to be too edgy, and I don't want to be too passé, right? And for each person, that's a different spot. And for each subculture, it's a different spot. It's kind of like Goldilocks, right? It's not too hot, it's not too warm. I want something that's just as creative as I'm comfortable with. This is an opportunity for people to really fine-tune an experience, share it socially with each other, establish that it's got kind of some social guarantor, that's cool, or a upvote or a like or whatever, and maybe then you buy it and you make it and you're cool. So we're trying to immerse people in an experience that merges their digital world and their physical world. And the tools we want to put in people's hands will enable some of the kind of social collaboration that I was just talking about. Maybe I get something to a certain point and I share it, and other people give me feedback about what it's like, and this is going to be great as a baby quilt, or man, what about that goat? You got to do something about that. You can also provide really important feedback that teaches people as they go, that maybe that's not such a great color combination and you can shift things around. And conceivably in communities that have done this kind of a project before, there might be feedback from the community itself about what would work and what won't. Finally, it is an opportunity to bring all the rest of the assets that live out on the web, the digital assets that live out on the web, into a project. So I already talked about, board shorts pulling from Instagram, but that's like this big. If you start talking about brands that have assets out on the web that could be conceivably customized, et cetera, et cetera. All sorts of licensing and difficulty around that, but nonetheless, you're creating an immersive experience that might be all about, a Marvel superhero or something. So that's the customer experience and what's going on outside the business. What about how you would experience this inside the business? And the statement I would make about that is really that you're turning the value chain around. Basically, you're going from a model where you make a decision, a giant bet, and you buy 8 containers of something, and you're motivated in that kind of a push to market model around the things that motivate a gambler, right? I need this to be a safe bet, so I'm going to choose for tastes that a lot of people might like. I need for it to be a bet with the highest rate of return, so I'm going to choose for options that are as inexpensive as possible. And I only really get one chance at this giant bet, right? Because it's going to go and then it's going to come across, and that's going to take 28 days. So I really don't want to make the wrong choices. And then if I do make the wrong choices, I'm going to put this all off and sell it below market, and I want that to be as small a loss as possible. So, and then, kind of the last step by this being sort of the dominant paradigm, your brand lives in the super expensive thing you started to try to sell, and it also lives in the below cost sale that's down the road at the discounter. So let's contrast that with a model that's built around pull, right? At the beginning of the example in all of these cases, nobody's actually ordered anything yet. And they're making and they're getting their social feedback and they're getting their likes, and then they make a decision, and then they pay, and then you're committed to whatever that order is. So there's no gambling. Your business can invest in exactly the quality that the market wants, that this customer is willing to pay for. And if that's pearl buttons, that's a great, you didn't have to risk a whole container load of bodices on pearl buttons. So because you're making it after it's been ordered, there's no waste, there's no dumping. And when you look to run your business, it's not sort of a gamble and then another gamble and then another gamble. You scale exactly with the demand of your customer base. So essentially what this does is, instead of sort of facing your business towards the supply chain and thinking about your big bets, you can turn around and face your business towards your customer and think about exactly what experience are they looking for and what features do they want in this finished good, and providing those. So I'm just going to go ahead and get to the last step here and wrap up. What we are trying to create is a platform that enables creative expression. We're looking for entrepreneurs, creative minds, people that write code, to innovate, to create experiences that enable you to make things with fabric. So at this stage, the API is in a beta mode. It's a closed beta, and we're looking for partners that are interested in working with us. We're looking for a couple of very particular features, many of which I've already talked about, in the application that they're seeking to build. An experience that's built around a customer, where the customer is adding value, an experience where that customer can reach out to the social community and get the feedback and the collaboration of their peers. An experience that is largely on the web, that doesn't involve a whole kind of physical element. Something that doesn't feel elite or super proprietary, something that's open and accessible and easy to use. Something that teaches, ideally people can teach each other, or the application itself teaches, and then something that allows people who might not think of themselves as being super creative to kind of test the water. So I want to just wrap up with an observation. So I started a business in 1996, and that business was teaching JavaScript and HTML and Java to people who were going to work with new media, which was a hot thing in 1996. And there were all the pundits and were writing about this great new media. And the words that they used were exactly these words: rich and social and reach, accessibility, crowd support, and creative expression. So the question that I would leave you with is textiles, as they convert to being a digital media, what's the possibility there? Thank you very much.